Hello, everybody. I'm Tony Langham. I'm Chief Executive and co-founder of Lansons, based in London and New York, but operating all around the world through the PROI and GCP networks. I'm going to talk to you today about the role of ESG in reputation building, and thank you so much for asking you to speak at the conference. I'm going to draw on lots of the work that I did when I wrote a book on reputation management for ECO, the global public relations industry body, and the PRCA based in the United Kingdom. And I'm going to draw on some of those things. And I think I want to start by talking about the whole industry of marketing services and what it is that marketing services does and what it is that marketing services delivers. And I'm a huge believer that our industry is really polarizing around two key things, and that's delivering sales in the form of leads or consideration and marketing at the top of the funnel at one end of what we do. At the other end of what we do, and of course the two overlap, we're delivering increased reputation, brand, trust and perception. So all of marketing services, whether we're in advertising, formerly public relations, formerly direct marketing, I think the most valuable things we do are either build, protect reputation, or deliver leads, marketing and sales. Today, of course, I'm concentrating on the reputation side of that. And I believe for probably lots of people on the call today who formerly thought of themselves as public relations or corporate communications or strategic communications people, the most valuable thing that we do is build and protect reputation. And I want to say a few words about that before I fit ESG into that world. I think it's really important that there's a clear base for what it is that we do, and there's a theoretical base for what it is that we do. And my favorite definition of what reputation is comes from the American academic and former practitioner John Dawley, author of, I think, the best book in the field. And he says that reputation doesn't belong to you, it belongs to your key audiences. Typically, organizations have around 8 key audiences. And reputation is the sum of what those key audiences think about you and feel about you. And the way they judge an organization, or indeed a person, is look at performance, what it is the organization actually does, behavior, how the organization behaves, how the organization communicates. And that's amplified by whether all of that seems to come from an organization that has a clear purpose and an authenticity. So that's the framework for reputation. And for me, that word reputation is interchangeable with respect and trust and brand and image. And it's really important, if we understand those absolute two key tenets, that reputation doesn't belong to an organization, it belongs to others. But clearly you can influence it. And when it's judged, it involves the behavior of an organization. And that's a really, really key thing for our profession and for us as practitioners. My favorite crisis quote comes from Stephen Covey, the author of 7 Key Habits of Successful People. And that's that you can't talk your way out of something, out of problems that you've behaved yourself into. And that's what we should always hold dear in our advice to the organizations we work for, or our advice to clients. If behavior has led to a problem, only changing behavior can solve a problem. Communications can't solve a behavioral problem. And when we think of reputation, we need to think in those terms, and it's going to be fundamental when we move to ESG. And to explain what it is we do, we need to be able to explain the power of reputation. And reputation means that organizations with the best reputations can charge more for their products and services, achieve more with less marketing spend, influence governments more than their rivals, enter new markets more easily than their rivals, and sometimes can get the benefits of the doubt when situations are difficult. And these are major, major things that deliver significant power to organizations. And wherever you look, you can see examples of better reputations delivering greater impact and greater success. Whether it's in the way that Heinz products are positioned versus own brand products in the supermarkets of the world, whether it's how easily Uber can enter new markets as it has around the world with Uber Eats, or whether it's the fact that some governments can borrow money more cheaply than other governments, like the Swiss government, even though it's the future ability of a government to pay back money that influences things most. But the Swiss government can borrow more money more cheaply than the American government, even though you might think the American government is a long term, in the political situation we're in, a more stable government. So reputation enables organisations to deliver those things, and to make it easier, as part of the book that I wrote, to demonstrate that to companies. And I don't believe any company really understands the full value of reputation. I broke down the benefits of reputation for the different functions of an organisation. I'm talking to you from the United Kingdom today, so of course I'll have an occasional drink of tea when I talk to you. To translate that into what we do and the areas we work in, I think a great reputation comes from four things. And as communications and public relations professionals, we integrally should be working in three of those areas. So you can't have a great reputation without great products and services. I mean, you look to the companies in the world with the best products organisations like Rolex, they couldn't be there, or Lego, without great products. But the other three things relate back to John's definition earlier and relate to things that we do every day in our working lives. Making sure organisations have a clear purpose, making sure organisations communicate in a clear, understandable, impressive way, and making sure organisations have a fantastic culture and do the right thing, because everyone in an organisation is an ambassador. So culture are fundamental parts of delivering reputation. The leap we have to make is to say that we can help manage reputation. I wrote a definition for my own book there, and it's long, but it's fundamental to our position in the world that we understand how we manage reputation, that we get involved in the behaviour of the organisations we advise, that we have a plan, that we use data, we identify gaps, we instigate programs, and we link all of that back to the fundamental purpose and behaviour of the organisation. That's how we manage reputation. And it was necessary for me to set that base, to talk about ESG's place in reputation and managing reputation in what it is we do. Because just as reputation management is fundamental to what we do, ESG is crucial to the reputation of the organisations that we advise. So everything is coming together to say that ESG is central to our clients or the organisations we work for. Therefore, it must be central to what we do. And most importantly, it isn't CSR or charity. ESG is a way of life. I used a definition here from SustainFi, but ESG covers the impact that every organisation has on its society and has on the world, whether that's in terms of its impact on the planet, its environment, whether it's impact on society, the S for social, or whether it's how the organisation functions in delivering things, whether that's in terms of paying tax, or whether how it's governed, how an organisation delivers governance. So those three elements, ESG, cover every way that an organisation has an impact on society. And how organisations view that is very, very different from organisation to organisation. You know, for instance, sustainability is key to some organisations. It's in the DNA, I would say, of IKEA, in the way that IKEA views its product development, views its use of sustainable materials, has just moved into that area of recycling and how it views its impact on the world. And it's fundamental indeed to the genesis of an organisation like Patagonia, how it sources its products and how it behaves. And ESG needs to be fundamental because there are significant challenges in the world. I've used examples from Greta Thunberg here. The system by which certainly Western capitalism functions, or even capitalism throughout the globe, is being challenged from a sustainability perspective. As Greta says, if change is impossible in this system, then maybe it's time to change the system. And that's not an idle threat. So not only there are challenges to organisations, there are challenges to the systems within which many organisations exist. And new challenges clearly happen all of the time. The question of how organisations engage with society, and whether they're confident enough to speak out on social issues, such as those thrown up in the United States, Western Europe and America by Black Lives Matter, are really key. I've used an example here from Ben and Jerry's, committing themselves to saying that we must dismantle white supremacy, where there are many organisations, and many that I've worked for and represented, that wouldn't step into those issues as readily as they should. But if we take ESG, that's the S of the G, it's important that they do. And I've used two quotes here from key thinkers in our industry. Richard Edelman, obviously the founder of Edelman, the largest public relations agency in the world, saying that now is the time for business to address the wage stagnation of the working class. That's a big claim for someone that advises major companies. Or Paul Holmes, the person behind Provoke, one of the great sort of thinking medias that informs our industry. With a really interesting perspective, I think, saying that companies that fail to take a position are now perceived as favouring the status quo. So if you aspire to be a leading organisation, on that quote, you have to be involved in society, key social trends, the S of ESG. Now, before I bring the two together, I'm making the case that ESG is fundamental to corporate reputation. There's some really important trends and some dilemmas when we talk about ESG, and I think we need to move beyond that probably in our thinking for the next 10 years. I mean, just for now, the organisations we advise, time for more tea for me here in England. For now, sustainability is the key to human survival. I mean, every day goes by, I'm talking to you today. I could cite Louisiana as a place of major climate events, but not a day goes by without there being a significant climate event that affects our world. Sustainability is the key to human survival. With Joe Biden's changing position in the United States and recent comments from China, COP26 in Edinburgh, Scotland this year is a key focus for minds for all of us that are advising organisations as we run through towards November this year and the events that might happen there. We have to acknowledge that the components of E, S and G mean different things in the different parts of the world. I'm conscious in the worlds in which I see those things mean very different things in Germany, for instance, and they mean in China, and there are some crossovers, but there are some differences. There's also the very existence of ESG as a combined sort of term, summarising everything. Is severely challenged by a company like Tesla. So Tesla, under the E environment, what Tesla has done with its own products and services and how it has completely changed the motor industry of the world. You could make a case for saying Tesla is the most significant company under E in the entire world. And yet, by some people's definitions of G, governance, controlled by one person, the voting shares controlled by one man, and a structure that doesn't gel with many capital markets in the world. Under the G, Tesla arguably isn't a leader at all. And maybe you could make a case for saying even quite the reverse. So we have that issue with the terms E, S and G together, and maybe they may have to come apart in the years to come. I think the meaning of ESG, how corporations engage with the world and how they measure their own impact with the world, that will remain with us forever. But the term ESG, which partly originates in the investment industry, may well not survive. But for now, I think we can say in our world as advisors that just as reputation is at the centre of what we do, if we advise corporates, ESG is fundamental to every single business and company in the world, and meeting ESG requirements is central to them. Which means it's easy to draw a conclusion for this talk that ESG is now fundamental to reputation building, and it's crucial to what we all do. Reasons for that, I think, are really, really straightforward. I talked about what reputation is earlier, and a great reputation really means exceeding the expectations of your key audiences. Those audiences include society, include governments. So to have a great reputation, you have to exceed the expectations of your key audiences. Those audiences, people and governments, want to see business playing its part, controlling its impact on the world, and contributing to a better world, which I think you can easily sum up as ESG. And there are different issues under each of those headings. And therefore, the only way to build a superior reputation today is to demonstrate the highest levels of ESG behaviour. And that means a lot of things for us. A great example of how that impacts on corporations are the tech giants of the world, running through Netflix and Deliveroo, but principally, of course, Google, Amazon, Facebook. They make our lives easier. They're the infrastructure in some companies. They've enabled the world to exist through the pandemic, survive through the pandemic. In many ways, their value to us as individuals has never been higher. But equally, they're under significant criticism from governments, sometimes for the way they're governed, sometimes for the way they've impacted on retail markets, sometimes from how they've impacted on the economy as a whole, sometimes from how they've impacted on the environment, sometimes from whether or not they pay the right level of tax. So delivering amazing service for those mostly American major companies across the world hasn't been enough to give them a great reputation. They can only have a great reputation if they help governments and society and they demonstrate their ESG credentials. For us, as corporate communications professionals, I believe in this world where ESG is fundamental to corporate reputation, reputation management is fundamental to what we do. We've got to up our game as an industry across the world. I think I've said throughout, we've got to advise our clients and the companies we work for on behaviour, not just communications. And that means in our day-to-day life, it's no longer enough for us to sit outside the boardroom, wait for the board of a company to make a decision, and then for us to say, okay, what's the best way of communicating that? That's not sufficient for us. It's sufficient if we are corporate communications professionals. It's not sufficient for us if we're reputation management professionals. If we're reputation management professionals, we've got to be impacting on what the companies we work for and our clients do. And as ESG is fundamental to them, we've got to be impacting on the decisions they take in terms of environment, society, and governance. That means we've got to advise on culture, change, and transformation. I said earlier that everyone that works for an organisation, I think as we all know, is an ambassador for that organisation. As Christine Lagarde said, what's really, really important is that people inside an organisation do the right thing when no one is watching. And therefore, we have to be advising on culture, on change, and on transformation, on very behaviour of people, if we're going to take our place as reputation management professionals. And that's a very, very long way away from where some public relations and corporate communications professionals are. But not only do we have to advise on behaviour, we also have to advise on the behaviour of individuals, the very culture of the organisations for whom we work. Closer to home and where we've done much better. So I think our game is up here, but we have to continue to progress, and we have to tell stories in words, pictures, and moving images, as well as any filmmaker or advertising agency. So many organisations do that. So many great examples all around the world. For instance, I know I'm talking to lots of people from India today. I've seen that superbly done by ad factors in India, with whom we often work closely. But we have to have that as a standard in what it is in our industry. And I think as agencies, putting my final point on this section, we have to be ESG businesses ourselves, or who will want to be advised by us when they judge their own suppliers? And how will we be able to advise if we don't understand the subject ourselves? So for my own business that I co-founded, Lansons, where I'm chief executive, it's really important to me that we've been carbon neutral for 12 years now, since 2009, that 66% of our workforce is women. It probably should be closer to 50-50, but that level of representation by gender runs through our firm. Women own 66% of the firm, so there isn't what we call in the United Kingdom, there isn't a gender pay gap, because we have equal representation at all levels through our organisation. We've made commitments on diversity in our own firm, and I've said that I believe that white supremacy and white privilege is something that needs to be addressed in the markets of the United Kingdom and the United States. And we have an organisation that's broadly owned by people. It isn't just owned by founders. And those things, I think, make us an ESG organisation. And I think it's important for our profession to lead on ESG if it's to take its place in this new world for our clients and companies we work for. So what I've done today is talk about our role in reputation building, our acknowledgement that building and protecting reputation is the most valuable thing that we do as professionals, our understanding that ESG isn't charity or CSR. It needs to be in the DNA of the organisations we work for if we're in-house, or for the clients we have if we're in consultancy. ESG is now fundamental to reputation building for the reasons that I've explained. And if we're going to grab that position as reputation managers, and we're in competition with lots of other people, from management consultants to former advertising agencies, then we need to up our game as public relations and corporate communications professionals. And where we need to set our sights, and I think some people are there, some people aren't, and some people see this as the future, some people don't, but I believe that we need to see our future as a profession as not as corporate communications or public relations professionals, but as reputation managers. That's how we take our place at the centre of corporate life, inside the boardroom of our organisations, and we advise them how they deliver their impact on the world, which currently is expressed as ESG, in a future very challenging but very exciting world as businesses and society change to try and change the planet. So thank you very much, Spectra, for asking me to talk to you today. I'm now really happy to take questions and discuss issues that I've raised earlier. So thank you very much for asking me, and thank you very much for joining the conference today.
Tony, what an exciting presentation. I think it absolutely, kind of gives us a very good view on how ESG is actually a reputational, can be a reputational management tool as well. Thank you so much. But I have a couple of questions, and I thought I can just start with those and, get your insights on that as well. Let me begin by asking you, a fundamental question. There are three issues. There's environment, there's social, and governance. All of these have been grouped together when they are so substantially different. I would just like to know your perspective on, what is ESG to you as three issues together.
Yeah, I think as I try to indicate, I don't think it will stay like that forever. And as I talked about, I think a company like Tesla really brings that into focus, because it is, I think, one of the leading companies in terms of its impact under the E environment. But for many people, it doesn't meet the high standards under G governance, and yet it's doing what lots of people would like to see more organizations doing. So I think the term came where it's come to me in the United States and the United Kingdom first, has been in the investment sector, where particularly pension funds that work for local authorities or work for governments have wanted a sort of screen and a filter to offer ESG solutions to the asset management companies to offer it to their clients, and pension funds of governments and states and authorities have wanted to make sure they're investing money in a way that's right for society. So this term ESG has come to mean so much in the investment industry. I think it won't survive. Personally, I don't think it will survive in wider society. I think you already hear lots of people saying it's so hard for people because lots of people think sustainability, but that's the E of ESG. It's not the S of ESG. So it already doesn't work with the language of the time. And you hear lots of people, I think it's been translated into people, planet, profit by some people. And I think for some people, people, planet, profit, works better because they know what people is, they know what planet is. And then if it's a Western society or a society that's capitalist, then they know what profit is. And I think it won't survive, and it doesn't quite make it to everybody, as you say, because of the differences. But I think for the rest of 2021 and into 2022, I think it will probably be the biggest thing in my world working for companies.
Excellent. That brings me to my next question. Tony, during one of your slides, you actually mentioned, how people perceive a company's environmental, social, and corporate governance efforts can differ from what they're actually doing. All it takes is actually a well crafted narrative to positively influence consumers' ESG sentiment. Only when you communicate that to people or what you're doing will a company's effort impact bottom line, right? That's exactly what I heard from your slide. Do you want to shed some light on that as well?
Yeah, it's good. It's a good question. I think. I mean, I've at the moment lots of the work that I get involved in comes from the problem side, where organizations have claimed something and then they've not been living to their own purpose or living to their own values. So I think the first thing that we must do is to make sure that, and we all use these words all of the time, to make sure that the organization is authentic, in that it using, it walks it walks the talk, or it lives to its purpose, or it lives to its values, and it does what it says it does. I think our first duty as a profession is to say, and I think it's probably still fine to say we have a great products that make people's lives easier, and our contribution to society is to make people's lives easier. And then and lots of companies say, and then we stick to the law on all of the other things. We're not trying to lead on society. We're not trying to lead on sustainability. We do what the law says on those things, but we make everyone's lives easier, and that's our purpose. I think that's authentic, and that's still possible in the world. I think younger consumers particularly, they want to see more than that, but I don't think organizations should pretend they're doing more than that if they're not. But if they want to, and I think I mentioned IKEA, I think if they're IKEA and they're doing more than that, then we can really help get that message across to consumers. But I don't want to be unrealistic, because the market I work most often in the United Kingdom. I mean, we've had examples. Fashion is a really interesting example, isn't it? We've had lots of examples, Boohoo being the most obvious, of fashion retailers that make great clothes that are very cheap, and in the case of that company, weren't paying a fair wage to their workers. But people carried on buying the clothes because they liked the clothes were cheap. People carried on buying clothes, and they didn't stop buying the clothes. Even after the publicity, people didn't stop buying the clothes either. So we shouldn't be unrealistic and think that all consumers want ESG. But where I think I like to go with my clients is to say all governments want ESG, and governments make the rules by which you live and work. So I think sometimes now the strongest argument for moving in an ESG direction is because what governments are going to ask of the company. And if somebody doesn't want to do it from within their heart, they may have to do it to maintain the great reputation with government. So maybe that's the place sometimes you have to start. That's a long answer and covered lots of issues, but I think it is very complex, and it's certainly not straightforward, in the sense of, be great at ESG, tell everyone you're great at ESG, people will buy your products. It's not as simple as that yet.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Tony. I'm sure the audience are absolutely learning from your tremendous experience. My next question actually has two parts, but let me just try and summarize those well. It's not enough for companies to ideate just ESG initiatives, run them by investors, and then call it a day. As organizations, it is very important to communicate ESG efforts to the public. As you communicate, each demography of audience reacts very differently to ESG initiatives. I'll be glad to hear your views on that. But let me, without asking your answer to that, let me just also put a very interesting question, which is very internal. ESG is very integral to culture, and I'm sure you actually brought it up in your slide as well. It's very integral to the culture and values of the company. It is very important to include employees. They must be integrated throughout your, entire corporate affairs and not just in the boardroom. Your thoughts on that as well?
Hmm. No, absolutely. I think, and I'll start with employees, but move out into other audiences.
Sure.
I think when I think of what our job is at the moment, I think in my head I often think of ESGP. I think our job is ESG and purpose is our current sort of key focus for our work with the companies and organisations and governments that we work, and because everyone's an ambassador and reputation is held by what audiences think, but so often audiences contact members of staff, come into contact with members of staff. So employees are fundamental. So an organisation has to have a clear purpose, or employees have to understand that purpose, but understand what that purpose means and live by that purpose, so they know what the organisation expects of them. And that's something that you can't tell people. They have to believe it. They have to see it around them. People have to work together to understand that, and organisations have to move forward together. And that means big organisations have to take tens or hundreds of thousands of people forward together. So cultural programs, talking to employees about what the company is about, making sure there are small groups where organisations can speak, making sure an organisation has champions, has people that can influence the people around them. And often we work with sort of champions networks when we go through change and transformation programs. I think that's really, really important. So yes, what maybe used to be called internal communications is now a major part, I think, of the work of the leading people that work in the reputation management space, corporate communications, public relations, whatever we call ourselves. I think it's now a major part of the work. I think with different audiences, it's like any other form of communication, isn't it? You need to understand the audience, understand what the audience cares about, and communicate with the audience in the way the audience wants to be communicated with. I think now we so often find ourselves, don't we, with brands, I'm sure you do, Churcher, as well. You find yourself talking about young people and what young people want and how they're different. I mean, if a young person takes their information from 3 or 4 bloggers that they watch on YouTube and then supplements that with TikTok or a platform like that, then if organizations want to reach that person, then they have to either reach them through their shared networks and through their friends, or they have to be on those platforms and communicate in a way that's interesting to those people. So I think programs now have to be sort of multi-level and multi-type. And I mentioned when I was talking that I think we have to make films as good as any filmmaker or as good as any advertising agency, even if we think that we're a public relations person. I think that's been true for a while, but it's even more true at the moment. But equally, I was talking to one of the main, I think you would say, finance experts, bloggers in the United Kingdom, and he was saying that at the same time as that, there's a small portion of the audience, I think he puts it at 1%, that want to understand everything about the organisation, and they want long form content, and they want everything to be explained. So I think while an organisation will need to be making films, need to be on TikTok, need to be short form communications, at the same time they'll need to be producing long form communication, and we see some take up, don't we, of podcast take up is increasing. People want that longer discursive content, and there will be 1% of the audience that wants to read long explanations of what an organisation does. So I think organisations have to produce that as well. I guess the answer is there is more communication, and that's true. And there's probably going to be an exponentially increasing amount of communication for the rest of time, I think.
Well, that answers my question very well. That brings me to two last questions from me, Tony. I think one of the things that as you read, and as part of I lead ESG for my company Lupin as well. And I just wanted to ask you, and this is basis my reading and also hearing in during some of the conferences, ESG efforts sometimes lack a well-designed plan, and sometimes it's actually viewed as greenwashing, which is gaining a lot of attention and traction. I would definitely like to hear your views, in fact, from a global perspective too.
Yeah, I think there's lots of greenwashing in the world. And what do I think of that? I think it's logical because um, the best organisations, sorry, the best organisations have often done great things and communicated really well, and then their competitors have often copied their language. That's been true ever since I've been involved in communication in the 1980s. So people copy what other people say if it works. So you're automatically on a progress to a situation where greenwashing is possible and overclaiming is possible. So I think there are lots of organisations that. Um, let's be fair to them, that talk about where they want to be a long time ahead of where they are. And I think it's fine if you talk about it in that way. I think it's fine for, I've been looking at Maersk, the shipping company, which, where ships take, 25, a life of a ship is 25 years, and the battery that can power a container ship hasn't been invented yet. So they can talk perfectly clearly about where they want to be in 2050 and 2060, and talk about how long it takes the shipping industry to reach zero emissions, and that's absolutely fine. And they do a really good job, that company, of talking about things honestly. So they're just straight. But there are lots of other examples where that isn't the case. So I think greenwashing is a thing. I think it's very hard as an employee or a corporate communications professional to know when you're taking part in that. What I try to do in my work is, where I see an organization making claims that I work for and represent, I try and say, where does that claim come from? Journalists and politicians will ask you to prove that claim. How can you prove that claim is true to me? So I think it's our right and our necessity as advisors to ask organisations to prove their claims, to make sure we do the best job for them, because I don't want to make things worse for them. And then I think some situations are very hotly contested. Extraction industries, for instance, and mining. We need things like lithium for electronic vehicles. So it's therefore important that the world still has mines, but the world wants to have mines that are as sustainable as possible. But that's a very difficult situation to judge. The world still needs oil for certainly the next 20 years, the next 30 years, maybe for the next 50 years. So the world still needs oil companies. It's very difficult you don't criticize companies for existing. You just want those people to do the best things possible. So I do think, again, I've said this before, haven't I? It's a very complex world, I think. But our job as communication professionals and reputation managers is to try and make sure that our organizations are authentic and what they say is very close to what they do. And we can do that through the lens of the journalist and say, journalists are going to ask you to prove this, so can you prove it?
I absolutely aligned with your thinking on that. Last one, and I'm sure I'm just representing wide set of audience here, but for most of the reputation professionals here, I absolutely want to hear from you, or rather, it'll be great if you shed light on how building integrity through ESG reporting is important. Very fundamental, but it'll be great to hear your views on that.
So ESG reporting is a very interesting subject in itself, isn't it? I'm quite familiar with the investment world and the world of investment professionals. And when you get investment professionals together, they all start disagreeing over ESG reporting and ESG metrics. So the subject is really, really important. I think that some industries probably need to agree standards and standard ways of reporting. and I think probably some stock exchanges and need to agree what ESG reporting they require from companies, and I think some governments probably need to start to think very carefully about what they require from companies. For now, the companies I work with, you want their ESG reporting to have integrity. So you want there to be a firm base for how they have chosen the metrics they're using under E, S, and G, and how that report is delivered and how they answer questions on that report. So that's a really, really important that because to start any of this conversation, only if ESG reporting has integrity does it have any value at all, or is it any use. Assuming ESG reporting has integrity, then I think it should be the basis for the brand. I mean, I think some brands clearly, the key element of some brands is, if you take a gaming brand, it's or a Netflix, it's about providing excitement, it's about providing entertainment, it's about transporting people. I think as part of those brands, people just want to know that the company providing all of that is having a good impact on society and is beneficial to society. I think in organisations like that, it's clearly long-term fundamental, but I don't think I wouldn't claim that it is at the forefront of the brand. But what I think is important is that it's going to grow in future. So I think it's an interesting conversation in that sense. You take some other brands, like a brand that is involved in fashion or furniture, where it's using materials of the world, or even more so, you take a brand that's involved in, say, lithium mining, which is important for electronic vehicles, but the extraction has an impact on the environment. Then the ESG environment is the brand and the reputation. So ESG reporting is fundamental to the business, because without doing what they do in a way that doesn't severely damage the world, and they can't really exist long term. So in that sense, ESG reporting is I think fundamental. So I think for me, ESG reporting has to have integrity, concentrate on that, and then how the ESG reporting is used to make the brand live and the brand have a reputation that's going to be good, add to its business and be sustainable. It depends a little bit on what the brand does, but ultimately it's fundamental to every organisation in the world. And I guess that's where we end, isn't it? Shirta, and thanks for this conversation, is that ESG is fundamental to what we do as reputation management professionals, because it's fundamental to the organisations we work for, or the organisations we advise if we work in an agency.
Tony, that was an excellent, not just your presentation, but some of the responses that you provided. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure the audience absolutely benefited from your experience, and I thank you on behalf of all the audience present and attending Spectra. Thank you so much.